Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, folks. Welcome to Karate Without Belts. I am John, and joined for the first time by someone from the Great White North. I'm joined by Mr. Vic Kinsella himself, a longtime friend, recently reconnected, and I'm just really excited to have you on the program, man.
Thank you very much, sir. And
How,
it's an absolute pleasure.
how have you been?
I've been good. I've been good. I guess you could say, living the dream. I took on a plant manager role, which I've been striving for about 5, 6 years. And I took command of the ship, and I got an amazing team that works for me, and the dynamics are fabulous. My kids are growing really strong, doing well in school. My son just graduated registered massage therapy.
Oh wow.
So it just seems like everything's connecting. Everything's getting good, you know?
Good. Good. That's great to hear, man. That's great to hear. How have you been doing? What have you been up to in terms of training lately?
Training, I still have multiple students for Ruku Kempo. We get together generally about once a week, once every 2 weeks, go over our kata, go over the basics, basic exercises, some of the basic weaponry. I also hang out with several Filipino martial artists. I bumped into the Filipino crew and I found that they were just a very family oriented bunch of guys swinging sticks. No politics, no red tape. Is just get together, swing sticks around, and afterwards usually have a good meal. So I do a bit of that. I don't do a lot of the MMA or boxing anymore. I'm getting older, and my body is it's falling apart a bit. I'm almost 50, and years of hard karate and hard training is, it's taken a bit of a toll on me. So I've taken a step back. I'm enjoying myself and the training I do right now, and it's progressing quite well.
Good. You're one of the few people who I've known. We've had a couple people on here before who've been in this wheelhouse, but I feel you're a very strong example of this. Is someone who has been both part of the quote unquote traditional side of things, but also been very active in the full contact, getting involved, getting on the ground, wrestling around, punching on, getting sweaty, getting bloody, um,
Yeah, yeah,
and something that we see a lot of the traditional guys flinch at or end up making kind of a, well, that won't work on the street, or if that's not the way, and there's just kind of ends up like kind of like a lot of people just kind of rubbing their hands and kind of being like, well, we would never do that, and that's not the way my teacher taught us, and this, that, and the other.
yeah, yeah.
Um, which has its pros and cons. I mean, as you just mentioned, where there's only a certain point where you'll be able to do that. I
Yes,
think moving into kind of the older age range would be harder, and it would be less and less safe to do so. But I,
yes,
I'm
yes.
interested in seeing in kind of your perspective of how, and we were just talking about it a little earlier, but how having that in your wheelhouse in the very least helps you helps remodify or kind of readjust your perspective on how martial arts works.
Martial arts is very, I guess you could say, very intricate, especially the different styles. I started in martial arts when I was 9, and I'm 49 now. And coming up the ranks in different systems, I found there's a lot of arrogance from club to club. My school, my system's better than your system. But then when you get older, you start to really ponder, am I in the right system? Do I have the complete system? And then that's when I went to high school with a gentleman, Sean Tompkins. He was the owner and founder of Team Tompkins. And he really got into MMA hard. Then he started training a lot of UFC fighters. He was the manager of Extreme Couture Gyms, and then he moved over to Tapo Gyms. He was the general manager at Tapo Gyms, and he had a stable of dozens and dozens of professional athletes. But hanging out with him, I started to realize, and he came from a traditional background as well. He did, I think it was Shotokan. You know, you can do patterns, and you can invest hours and hours and hours in training and doing a kata. And it's, you know, it's that one-on-one battle where you're trying to make yourself perfect. And then you do a little bit of kumite here and there, and that prepares you, right? So if somebody attacks you, you've got a bit of kumite experience. But the thing I did find is when you were doing MMA or boxing, there is no kata. You're getting in there, you're swapping blows on a constant basis. And I found with over 15 years bouncing in nightclubs and, you know, at large venues, I did find that when stuff hit the fan, it came down to my boxing abilities, really. You know, if I had to control a situation, it's just pop, pop, it's done, you know, and grab the person, escort them out. And you know, it came down to a lot of my martial arts techniques because you get together, you do some techniques, but you know, you might do in a seminar, in a 4-hour seminar, you might actually do 45 minutes of actual hands on.
Right.
Whereas boxing, if I go to a 4-hour seminar, I'm pretty much boxing for 4 hours, you know, the constant movement of the arms. And I did find that as I got older and older, uh, I'm not that old, but as I got older, the maturity really starts to set in where you actually start to see that every system has holes in it. Boxers are, you know, if a boxer goes up against a wrestler, you know, they're going to the ground and they're going to get dominated. You know, a wrestler, you know, if they go against a karate guy and they don't shoot in quick enough, they're going to get a kick to the head or, you know, a good tuite on them. So I started realizing every system has holes in it. And then talking to some very intelligent martial arts masters, they themselves have said, like, there's holes in every system. There's holes in every system. That's why you should keep an open mind to what other systems have to offer. But as you know, there's systems and organizations that keep a closed mind, and if you don't open up that mind and see what other people are doing, you can't prepare for those pit bulls that are being bred at the gym, right? So that was my whole take on it. And I started falling in love with a lot of different arts and seeing the good attributes of different arts. And, you know, I use Riku Kempo as my foundation. That is, you know, the tools that I have. But then I put a little bit of boxing into it. You know, I'll do a little bit of Eskrima or Kali, Balintawak. I'm an accomplished wrestler. I've done a little bit of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It kind of rounds it out. So I know inevitably if somebody takes me to the ground, I can get back up pretty quick. It's the whole mentality of keeping an open mind, and nobody's perfect, you know? And that's my whole take on it.
That's interesting because you get a lot of the MMA guys, a lot of these pit bulls you were saying at the gym, as you just said, like they will pretty much say that traditional stuff needs to go out the window. There is no room for it. You're wasting time on kata. You get the Joe Rogan types who are all like, yeah, yeah, man, you just the UFC, it's just the MMA. There's nothing else. And
But the thing that MMA lacks, that martial art or that traditional arts has, is the discipline. You know, you can go and hit a punching bag for a half an hour. That's awesome. But I find in a lot of MMA gyms, you get a lot of arrogance, a lot of ego. Uh, young guns come in, they think they can take on the world, and they want to prove that they're the alpha dog. And whereas a lot of karate dojos you go into, yes, you have your people that are filled with piss and vinegar, but there is a structure there. And a lot of that ego and self-centered thought patterns can be taken away when you enter a dojo. And that's one of my biggest things. And traditional arts can give you that focus, right?
Mm.
You can box, you can do MMA, wrestling, whatever, but without really true focus and actually self-centering yourself, it's trust me, I've seen it a million different ways in all the years in bars. I've seen karate guys take out wrestlers. I've seen wrestlers take out boxers. I've, back and forth, back and forth. So if you ask me who's got the greatest art, honestly, nobody does. It's every art has their own finesses, their own nuances. And to me, it's just staying rounded, being aware of what's out there, right? If you're in a heavy university town that has a huge wrestling program, you probably want to understand wrestling a bit if you go to the bar, because while you're arguing with the guy, all of a sudden he shoots in on you, he drops to the ground, picks you up, slams you. You weren't prepared. You were about to go into your karate stance, and it's but if you see how he's positioning his body, and that's always a good thing, watch the body, watch the body. You see how he's positioning, this guy's going to try and shoot in on me, right? So that's where you can alter your body and get ready. And it's that's another good thing. I do want to point out is a lot of karate guys, they watch the center of the body. Don't watch the center of the body. Watch lower. Watch how the suspension's working. You know,
Mm.
if if you can see the legs move a certain way or he opens his foot, he's going to do something, right?
Well,
Everybody's staring at the chest and trying to gauge his upper body movement, and but the suspension. And if you take that suspension out, you take the suspension out of a car, it's done. It's not going anywhere.
what's interesting about that, you saying that, is that we you always get taught energy comes from the feet, hips control everything, right? From the
Yep.
actual perspective of doing something, but
Yes.
from the quote unquote understanding of what the opponent does is always, yes, check the center line or check where their hands are or something like that. It's
Yes.
interesting because I've never heard anybody say it that way from that
Yes.
perspective.
I walked into just before COVID hit. I got invited to a karate seminar. It was for a Shore and Root club. It was an amazing club, very well structured. A young gentleman ran it, but he was talking when you're sparring, always stare at the chest. That way you can see the shoulder movement. And I'm like, uh, okay. But the thing is like I can fake you out with my shoulder, but it's what I'm looking for is lower. I'm looking for the belly or even the legs. I'll even look down at the legs a little bit, but you got to stay wary of the fists, right? You don't stare at his legs, you're going to get clocked, but you want to keep that distance and keep the focus on the suspension. If you can see him opening his foot, he's going to try and do a kick, right? If he's going to just come straight in and he starts inching straight in, he's going to probably try and do a haymaker or punch straight up. So and to me, like there's people out there that may disagree with me. Fine. That's what has helped me. And, being a bouncer in some pretty rough nightclubs, there's been quite a few skirmishes and I've never gone down. And, that's awesome that I've never gone down. But, if I teach it this way, is the next guy going to go down? Is he going to get hurt? I don't know. I know what's worked for me personally, and I know my preferences. And I like to watch body language. You look for that left eye aggression. If you see them really starting to position their left eye towards you, it's a psychological thing, and they're getting ready to attack, right? And that's where you either try and talk them down or position yourself in a more advantageous segment, right?
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense, and there's not a lot that, I wouldn't say not a lot that happens in traditional karate, but the I think the downside is saying there's discipline, or there's a lot of quote unquote self focus within traditional martial arts, is that you're so focused on the self. or you're so focused on kind of like where you are or how good your kata is looking or how good the technique reaction is, so to speak.
Yes.
You're not
Yes.
actually gauging what's going on around you. Now, I'm not saying everybody
Yes.
does that, but it tends to be excised a lot. Like a lot of what we came up through was follow the kata's pattern, follow this pattern, follow how this works, see what the reaction is, which are all good things. But there's not an if there isn't an account for spatial awareness, there's not an account for size discrepancies, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yes.
you're not really gonna make it work. The and this is where, of course, you're going to have people like yourself in your positions where we've had lots of just not I say brute, but just gross physical responses to
Yes.
situations because you learned this will work, this punch will work, this box of the ears will work.
Yep.
Not this grab by the hand, hit here, take out the leg there, and that'll be fine. Because those aren't taking into account where the person actually is and what the
Correct.
person's
Correct.
positions actually are.
Correct.
So, of course, like those are the huge flaws there. On your experience from that, do you feel that has really affected how you teach traditional martial arts?
Yes. Yes. Quite often, like when I have students come in, you pair students up, and people have certain favorite pals that they train with. But I try and mix up the bodies because I always get the question. It seems like I swear every time somebody asks me to teach them, one of the first questions, what do I do against a 6'5", 350-pound man? Run. No, I don't know. Take up jogging. But you know, it's one of those things where in my program, I try and teach that, whether you're dealing with a small person, an athlete, you get those kids that they're really angry at you and they rip off their shirt, and these guys are shredded, and it's like, oh boy, here we go. And and then you get the huge massive men, the farm boys, and each one has a different way to deal with it. The bigger they are, you take out that suspension, they fall really fast. And when you got 350 pounds behind you, you take that knee out, they crumble really quickly. But you get a lanky athlete and you try and take the suspension out, they bounce back pretty quick. And then you've got to watch those fists that are flying. So that's where you go for the upper game, right?
Yeah.
And, I've always found just different evasion techniques. If somebody's really, you're trying to push somebody out of a bar, they've started a fight, they've injured somebody, they've, touched a waitress, anything like that. And I honestly find that's where you get into that warrior mentality. And if they're exercising too much aggression, you just execute immediately. Instead of sitting there arguing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then all of a sudden he clocks you or sucker punches you when you look away, I just execute. And that's what sometimes separates that warrior mentality from the average karate guy, right?
Well, let's back up.
Just knowing when to execute.
Yeah.
And
Let's back up to that. What do you
yep,
can you
go ahead.
define that for us? Because there's lots of people who, good or bad, have used that term warrior mentality or warrior mindset. Um,
Yes.
how would you define that?
The warrior mentality, it's to me, it's do or die. If you asked me today, if you held a gun to my head and said, I'm going to kill you, I tell you right now, John, I'm not going to beg for my life. You do what you need to do, right? Whereas if you go up to, say, another fifth degree black belt that just doesn't have that mentality, you hold a gun to his head and say, you're going to die today. And all of a sudden, oh, please, I have children. And think about this. To me, that's not a warrior. A warrior is ready to die at any time. A warrior is not afraid of death. In fact, I've been told on many, many cases that I'm very cold. When somebody comes to me for comfort, whether it be a family member or a very close friend, oh, my mother passed away, and I'm like, oh, that's that sucks, just remember the good times. And it's like, they come to me for comfort, but then they tell me that I'm cold. I'm cold because death happens. We're all going to die unless some miracle drug or something comes out in the next, God knows how many years.
Right.
We're all going to die. So choose it. If somebody says they're going to take your life, don't. It's like when somebody shows me a video of a guy with his hands tied behind his back, his feet tied behind his back, and they're threatening to kill the guy. With me, you're never going to tie my hands behind my back unless you kill me, right? I'm never going to allow myself that position. And that's where, some people think it out, it's and some people they train hard, and they're, they've got that alpha dog, you know, uh, mentality. But at the end of the day, if, they get confronted with a knife, that's, they freeze. And I have had that on three separate occasions. I've had people pull knives on me. And honestly, it was just a knee jerk reaction. It was like swatting a fly away. I've never been cut. And the one bouncer that was working with me, he's like, dude, I seen that knife come out, and he goes, I almost shit myself. And I'm like, I didn't even register it. I seen the knife, I took him out, and we got him out of the bar, and the police were called. And to me, it was just, to me, that's the warrior mentality. And it's,
There's
you,
no question in between. It's just
yeah, yeah,
go.
yes.
And what do you think? Do you think that came out of training? Do you think that's just a personality thing? Do you think that's an issue of like you can't, especially with all the kind of more of the in the ring type training you've done, you've just learned from that sort of discipline that's been imported from traditional settings. Go do, or what do you think sparks that for you?
Um, it could be a bit of my upbringing. I had a pretty rough upbringing. My mother and father were always fighting, and there was a lot of hands-on stuff, back and forth, and they got divorced. And just when I was a young kid, I was a pretty angry kid. And then as karate started progressing, I calmed down. I wasn't as angry, but I was very competitive. I wanted to be the toughest guy. If this guy broke four boards, I wanted to break five, and I'm not saying you have to be born with it. You can, like, think about it. The military establishes this every day. If they have 100 soldiers on the battleground, and the shells start flying, I guarantee you at least 80 to 90 of those guys go resort right back to their training, and they're ready to die, and they're ready to, you know, and yes, there's always going to be people that get scared. Having fear is natural, right? You know, if you go parachuting, jumping out of a plane, it's not natural. And it's natural to have that fear, like, am I going to live? Even though 99.9% of the time it's perfectly safe to go parachuting, but there's still that fear. And it's the people that really control that fear. I guess maybe out of time, maybe a lot of my training had to do with it. I could have been maybe just born with that mentality. I know it's just always been there. When I'm confronted with something, I just choose. I'm either going to execute or I'm going to walk away.
Do you think the do you think that can be something that can be taught or somehow distilled, or is that an purely experiential thing?
I think it can be taught, most definitely. But then once I like if I taught you how to just have that mentality, the do or die mentality, that fine line, but then after I teach it, then it's still up to you, right? So if you walk into a really hairy situation, and the guns come out, the knives come out, or maybe it's just five guys that just want to beat you up. It's now still up to you. It's what's in your heart and your brain. Psychologically, I think it can be fully taught 100%. Like I said, we do it with soldiers all the time. But there is people that come back from war suffering from PTSD. It's very hard on them seeing, that level of violence and battles. But then there's people. I have a cousin. He's seen war, and he came back and no PTSD. It's just, is he cold or no? He just, some people can handle it more than other people can, right?
And so I mean that brings us into the if we have on one hand we have the I guess we can kind of go in four directions with this. On one hand we have the warrior mindset, and that can kind of go into a complete soldiering, actually
Yeah,
joining service or anywhere, and then kind of in the sliding scale bar, you know bar bouncer and competitor, and then down here you have traditional karate teachers, stuff like that, maybe super traditionalists, and then over on the sliding scale over here you have regular people, regular guy, right? Kind of have kind of
yeah, yeah.
for the audio version of this to paint that visual picture, right? Paint that mental picture.
Yes.
How do you, because on one hand you have that mindset of being able to be the warrior. Now, I'm not going to play devil's advocate here, but what I will say is that there are people who take that way too far.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and they go well, and I'm very careful in speaking about this because I want to respect your point of view, and I think that's a valid point
Yeah.
of view because that's purely a mindset. That's a do or die mindset
Yes. Yes.
versus I am warrior man, and my whole life is about this. My whole life is being like the guy who will be this like gun ho hero, when in reality that's like kind of a I don't know masculine power fantasy.
Yes. Yes.
And so
Yes.
and then but then you have regular people who walk into take your pick military sport fighting training or traditional martial arts. And so how do you temper it so it's something that isn't something that looks like it's an impossibility to get into, because I don't think it's impossible for anybody, but at the same time making sure people understand, regardless of what you go into, that's something you probably will need more than anything else, more than any of the other training, more than any of the boxing or the tuite or the kata or whatever.
Yes.
I guess sorry, I'm trying to navigate my way through this thought. But how would you be able to say show that to somebody in the kind of distilled setting from your experiences? And how would you be able to kind of make that I don't want to say appealing, but accessible to average guy? Or do you feel that's
Um,
just an impossibility?
no, it's not an impossibility. I met I actually have a really good example. I met a young gentleman. It was once again another seminar I was invited to. Uh, I did a little demonstration, and this young gentleman, he was really frail. He was probably about 115, 120 pounds soaking wet. He had really tiny hands. And I tell you, he got his back up and he was trying to play alpha dog against a 230-pound man. And I'm just like, wow, kid, calm down. And he had that warrior mentality, but you could just see that when shit went crazy, he'd be the guy hiding really quick. But I like to work with people. I like to work with people. So throughout the seminar, I kept picking him as my partner. I'm like, hey, like, back off a bit. Like, hey. And when we did a technique, I just give him a little bit of a little bit of oomph just to let them know, like, okay, you keep telling me you're a third degree black belt, but I just gave you one of these and knocked you on your ass. Like, don't do your alpha dog stuff to me. And as the seminar went, him and I kind of warmed up really good to each other, and he started asking me, like, I want to have power like you, and I want to have that steadfast mentality. And I said, I find the best warrior mentality is to have a calm mind and just focus on the situation. Don't focus on trying to be a man. Don't try and focus on ego. Just focus on the situation. And for a fairly small guy like him, I explained to him, when you focus on the situation, if there's an avenue that you can get out of the situation, do it, exercise it, use your brain, don't use your fist, right? And that's completely opposite of what I probably would have said when I was 20. I would have said, use your fist to hell with your brain. But nowadays it's, and just working with that young gentleman during that seminar, it's, you start to see that sometimes if you're a big meathead and stuff like that, people will try and elevate or get to your level. But each person is a different character, you know. Uh, I can try all my life to be John Ebersol, but I'm never going to be John Ebersol,
God
right?
forbid.
You are
God forbid.
unique. I'm unique, right? I can learn things about John. John can learn things about me, and we can mimic each other, but we'll never be each other.
And that's where I feel like you ultimately are going to have the, I don't want to say weird, but the personalization of martial arts through experience. You're always, and
Yes,
it's always going to be tempered through the personality of the person that's going through. But and this is where style falls off to a large degree because it's based on the people who are actually doing the thing. Because style isn't
yes,
out there somewhere. Like it's in the people who are doing it. Like
yes,
baseball is not, you can't go look and say, look, there's baseball. No, you see a team going out there and playing baseball. You can't, it's a verb. Like you can't
yes,
not do, you can't not, it's not a noun, right?
yes, yes,
Um, Getting into back in my language teacher mode. But you can also see where people's experience rub off vicariously to a degree.
yeah,
And there's good ways of that, and there's bad ways of that. For me, the bad way of that is always, well, teacher said this and this and this, and teacher said this and this and this and this and this, and so it's always this weird vicariousness. But the good way of it is kind of how you were doing it, where it was like you were using your experience to show this young guy that path rather
yes,
than saying, well, when I was your age, I did this, and this is what worked for
correct.
me. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yes,
that's something I'm always very careful of because you get a lot of
yeah,
people who are going to sit there and tell you the stories, which is fun, always fun. But
yeah,
they those stories don't equal action. They really never should.
yeah. I've just when you mentioned the stories, I've bumped into a lot of martial artists in my time, and they will tell me they took on 15 guys and didn't break a sweat. I can just tell a
Wind.
mile away they've never been in an actual fight, you know. But it's and then you see the really quiet guy over there who says, I got into a fight one night, and I worked a guy over pretty good. And you see he's got a flat nose, cauliflowered ears, scarred knuckles. This boy's been around the block, and he's he's done more than one fight, right? But it's yeah, I've seen lots of storytellers, and they're fun. And as I get older, like I said, like when I was younger, I probably would have challenged them, right? It's like, I don't believe you. I can kick your butt right now. But as I get older, I want to hear the story. Tell me your story of 15 guys. Tell me who you took out first, and tell me the 15th guy, and how you dated all their girlfriends after. Just tell me a good story. And it's fun. It's fun.
it's almost the kind of okay time to be an enabler to a degree,
Yeah,
right? Because you're just like, yeah, go ahead, it's fine.
yeah,
Because you just hang out with the lad for like 3 hours. He'll pay you get him to pay for a beer or two. It's all right.
oh yeah, add that too.
Well, and because in that situation, you're exercising a kind of a long, a less used, long heard of kind of clandestine version of mastery, right? Because you're just kind of
Yes,
understanding intuitively what someone's trying to tell you, what someone's trying to communicate to you, whether or not they're
yes,
lying, whether or not they're really getting at what they're trying to get at, what they're trying to get out of you. Um,
yeah,
what like all the kind of G-men-ness like has always been trying to get towards, but we've always heard like some of the best martial artists are also some of the most socially capable.
yes,
And if they're not,
yes,
then if you have that social sense about you, then you're okay. I was hanging out with a guy in Okinawa, and he was talking to me about something very similar. It's not my story to tell, so I'm not going to tell it here. But how he essentially was a young man, and how he could not touch an old guy just because he thought getting the hands up was a smart move. And he
yeah,
learned very quickly that getting the hands up was not a smart move. So
yeah.
that's all I'll say about that. Overall, would you say going forward in teaching and training, would you say you'd be able to hybridize what you've learned through the years in order to pass that on as the version that you understand to your students? Not necessarily as a
Um,
style, but just more as a mindset.
um, yeah, I see a lot of that on Instagram, YouTube, where people, when you look at their backgrounds, they started in traditional, they got into some MMA and stuff, and they've hybridized it, and the art looks beautiful, it looks amazing, and but for me, I am still that person that I keep everything separate. Like when I do Ruku Kempo, I do Ruku Kempo. When I do stick fighting, I do stick fighting. Now I do. There's a really good martial artist who one time told me. He said, if you take a look at a lot of the martial arts, they all have in their system two sticks. And you take a look, pretty much all the arts have two sticks. And there's a correlation between the positioning of the sticks and the positioning of the hands. Riku Kempo's got the Tanbo. The Filipino arts have Kali and Eskrima, Bruneian arts, the Indian arts. They all have two sticks. And to me, it's that correlation is amazing.
Hmm.
And you know, would I hybridize it? I don't know. At this point in time, I still keep everything separate. If I do Muay Thai kickboxing, I keep it Muay Thai. I don't have the actual karate kicks in it. If I do Muay Thai, I don't do standard boxing with standard structure. If I do standard boxing, it's that it's I think though, Jonathan, that is actually an amazing question though, because like I said, I've seen some hybrid arts that are just beautiful. It's beautiful. It's like, where did this come from? And I think inevitably, maybe once I start pushing 55, 60, maybe I'll turn into something hybrid and call it Vic Do Go or something. I don't know. We'll come up with a really cool name. You can help me.
Maybe. I don't know. Um, well, and I think there's a bit of strength to keeping things separate because each thing does its own thing, right? The
Yes,
boxing is going to do
yes,
one thing, MMA is going to do, or MMA Muay Thai is going to do another.
yeah,
It's interesting that you bring up the two sticks thing because then it's like you talk about like you go right into boxing and Muay Thai and no sticks, but they're always using
no
two
sticks,
fists.
but yeah, if you
Yeah,
take a look at the way they position a lot of their hands, and then you put the sticks in your hands, it's the same movements, right?
yeah. So I
and
mean, I guess you
it's
wouldn't even
amazing.
necessarily need to. So you wouldn't need to like formally hybridize anything, right? You could just okay, this is a framework. This is a framework and a
Yeah,
workaround. We're gonna
yeah,
throw different things on said framework and see how they work.
yeah, yeah,
And I feel like that's kind of where a lot of most people who they say are geniuses in martial arts or kinetic geniuses tend to go with, right? They have that base in that
yeah,
trellis or whatever, and they just go from there. So karate, running, eskrima, boxing, whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, there definitely is some geniuses. Like I've seen people that, yeah, they would start off in Riku Kempo and then halfway through a kata, all of a sudden it's into like something else. And it's like, how did you even think of that? To me, it's like, this is the kata, that's the way it goes. How would you think to move your hand postures this way instead? And just watching how they move, it's like, wow, I never would have thought of that. I would have just thought keep the systems separate, but you know, in a fight situation, it's now I have a huge arsenal to pull from. So if I know there's a certain body position that's going to be natural if this person's attacking me, it just naturally comes out with me. So now I'll go into something else, right? Instead of thinking about what in my Kempo arsenal will work good for this body position and this form of aggression. To me, I can flow into something else really quick. If I know I can just do a straight punch or you know a left jab, I do it. But if the guy just happens to reach his arm out, boom, I can do Kempo, right? With a lot of the Kempo and the hand changing postures, believe it or not, a lot of that you can do out of Cali and Arnis. You know, a punch comes in, you can just switch it right over and then strike. And yeah, but watching how people actually culminate it into an actual pattern, it, they are geniuses.
Yeah.
Now, once again, I've seen really good guys and I've seen people that have made their own art, and it's like, what the hell is that? You can just see you know 1,000 miles away. This is just not going to work. But that's what they're passionate about, so let them go at it.
Well, and I think there in that regard, there's more of like instead of seeing the framework and knowing how to put stuff on it, they see the stuff they put
Yeah,
on it, but there's nothing behind it. So
correct,
you end up
correct.
getting those weird things that people think it's like the frame, it's the stuff you put around the frame, not the frame itself. So
Yes,
if you have a decent framework for like your body mechanics and body and how and body movement works, and you understand awareness and situational awareness and kind of spontaneity and how that stuff works together, you can make anything work. But if you're just like,
yeah,
well, these are the techniques that I learned here, and then these are the techniques I learned here, and these are the techniques I learned here, maybe you can make something work.
yeah, yeah,
I always want to champion the guy who's like, I don't get it, but I can make it work anyway. Like so,
yeah,
I think there's room for that guy too. Oh, the scrapper. You always have to give the scrapper credit because they can at least scrap. Where a lot of these guys who like come up through, like I did karate since I was 5, they never actually had to scrap. So
yes,
that's one thing I would say. You know, credit to the scrappers where it's due. So
yeah, yeah. That reminds me, you know, of it was so amazing. It was God. I wish we had smartphones back then. But there was this guy. He had like dozens and dozens of trophies. He was from a Shore and Rue club, but it was more sporterized. And this is the guy that would twirl the bow staff around on his finger and throw it up in the air, do the splits and catch it, and don't get me wrong, like that level of sport karate and that level of showmanship takes so much athletics and discipline and structure. But will it work on the street? No. No, it's not going to work on the street. And I'll tell you that right to your face. I don't care if you have 400 trophies and want to come argue with me all day. It's not going to work on the street.
Of course not. And then,
But that martial arts, there's a lot of dedication to it. But I remember this guy just bragging, and he just had trophies. He was always in the newspaper. And he came up to the bar one night, started getting drunk. And of course, I was working the door. And then we had earpieces in. One of the boys called me up to the bar because there was a situation arising. At the time, I was the head bouncer. So when stuff went awry, I would always kind of be involved. So I went up there, and this guy picked a fight with a farm boy. Like, I'm talking the no neck farm boys that are all built with muscle, and they pick up 3 hay bales in one arm. And I'm thinking, oh, dude, you're going to get hurt. And he's like, no, I'm a world champion 5 times over and blah, blah, blah. And he had a gold ring that said he was a black belt. And this farm boy looked right at him and said, I'm going to tear your head off. And he goes, I'm a black belt, like that. And this farm boy just hauled off and punched him. And it was the loudest crack I've ever heard in my life. And all I seen was this guy's feet, and he just landed on his neck. And I'm just like, oh, well. It's like, yeah, you can tell you've never been hit before. But this is funny.
that's a rarity, and I think that
Yeah.
that I'd be interested to see what it would happen what the day after was for that guy,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
From like a
I didn't see him come around the bar ever again, really. But
but you got to think about like how that shakes somebody, right? And then how that
oh, yeah.
and then that's just going to be like, does he quit? Does he just stop
Yeah.
training? Does he take off? Does he ever wear that ring again? That's like the great
Yeah.
introduction to a movie. That's like to like you have this montage of the guy being like, I'm twirling around my bow. I've won 5 world championships. I got this ring that says I'm a black belt. And then it's like 5 minutes in, he goes to the bar. He's getting drunk. He's being real loud. He's got the babes on his side. Everyone's his friend. And then this farm boy just hauls off on him. And then the next day, it's all
Yeah.
gone.
Yes.
How does this guy
It's
rebuild
done.
his world?
Yeah. And the sad part is that guy, like, I never followed up with him. I never really heard from him again. I didn't see him in the newspapers. And all I could think about is that probably shook him up so badly that he just threw in the towel,
Yeah.
because you got to think, you've trained so hard to get so many trophies, and then a moment like that changes your life. So now you have fear that no matter how good or how many trophies you have, you're never going to be good enough, and that's what drives some people. A lot of martial arts studios have high turnover rates because the kids get in there, they're busting their ass, they don't get graded this month because they still haven't learned the pattern. So they start to get, afraid. It's like, oh, I'm never going to do it. This isn't going to help me. Or, they get their yellow belt or their orange belt, and then some kid at school slaps them around a bit. So now they're afraid. It's like, why continue on to get my black belt? Because this stuff doesn't work. And it's like, well, you're only an orange belt. But I see so many people that they give up martial arts, and yet, for 40 years of my life, it's done a lot for me. It's given me a good, strong mind. It's done a lot. I've traveled all over the world for it, and it's amazing if people just embraced it and really hopped up in the saddle and stayed in it longer. I think it would be so enormous for a lot of people.
Because we don't necessarily, when we talk about the wins, we don't talk about the losses, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
and so in that regard, the kid who just has a yellow belt, or the guy who's that 5 world time champion or whatever, like once they get the L, once they have to take the L, then suddenly it's all over. When for a lot of
Yeah.
people, for you and me particularly. Um, I've talked about this on here before. How I got knocked out like the first time I ever did Bogo. There was reasons for that, but I mean,
Yeah,
2 years later, I went in and started kicking ass. So I mean,
yeah,
you got to take it on the chin, or wherever I suppose you end up landing,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Bogey is something I never liked it. With that the big steel cage on the face and all the padding, and I just loved, especially boxing. You get in the ring, you're gonna spar like 8 rounds with various people, and just to stand and bang, and you know if you get that punch in the face and you don't want it to happen again, you're gonna bob and you're gonna weave, you're gonna get different body position. But Bogu, it's like straight up line. It's got a lot of really good stuff. Like if somebody's gonna attack you and you're really good at Bogu, you're just gonna go straight up the line and crush them. But I personally never enjoyed all the headgear and stuff. It just agitated me.
It's a different skill set, and and there's goods and
Yeah.
bads. It's a training tool. My
Yes.
buddy Raul will maybe push back on me a little for that, saying that. No, it's definitely because I noticed this too when somebody else who we had on here way back in the day, Jimmy Teller. Everyone's like he's a traditional master or whatever. He's like, we get on the floor. He's like, yeah, let's do some just quick light free sparring. Let's go. No face it. Just don't try to get too hard on it. Just light sparring. And I was always thought, why are we doing this light sparring stuff? Or like people had always said, we're traditional. We always do full contact. But there's as much place for that type of stuff as there is for hitting full contact, because that's a great way of
Yes.
warming up, and that's a great way of putting on some of the pressure. Not all of it, not
Yes.
even a lot of it, but some of it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, well, Vic, is there anything else you want to kind of say before we wrap up here today?
No, other than it's obviously been an absolute honor hanging out with you, John.
Yeah, it's been great having you
We've
on. I know we kind of
we've
knocked about a bit, but
yeah, we've swapped some sweat in the past, and we've chewed some of the same dirt, and I have a lot of respect for you, and it was really good that we reconnected, and hopefully we constantly stay in touch.
yeah, definitely. It's great having you on, and it's good to know that there's someone else out there who's really reaching hard for the same goals, despite distance and whatnot. Um, you just recently started your own podcast, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. I call it the Green Desk Podcast.
Ooh, any particular reason as to why it's the Green Desk?
Um, I own a Kawasaki Ninja, and I love the lime green, and I loved it so much. My new team at my new job, they took to me very quickly, and they realized I was the type of leader that's going to be in the trenches with them. And while I was on vacation, they actually fabricated me a lime green Kawasaki desk. So it was the first in our empire. Our company makes kitchen cabinetry. So they actually had a trial swatch of material come by, lime green, just to make this desk. So they actually put a lot of thought into it. And then when I was thinking about starting a podcast and just networking and getting to know people and listening to some stories, I was going over all these different names, like, well, maybe I should call it this, maybe I should call that, maybe I'll just go Vic and sell a podcast. And then after the green desk, I'm so proud of that green desk and what it means to me. It shows that I've connected and I found my tribe. And these people, I'm willing to bleed for them, and they're going to bleed for me, and we're going to have a really fruitful relationship and career. So that's why I named it the Green Desk.
Cool, cool. What do you got going
Yeah.
on this week in terms of training?
This week, actually, I hired one of my karate students, but he's on afternoons, so we're actually going to train tomorrow.
Right on.
So that's my Sunday, your Monday, and then probably I think it's Wednesday. I'm supposed to hook up with Jason Arnold. He's from the Balintawak Filipino system, and him and I are going to toss around some sticks. I think it's next Saturday. I should be meeting up with Preston. I don't know if you remember
I
Preston
remember
or not.
Preston.
Yes. So he's still in the military full time, and then he came to me, said he wanted to go back to school, so he's been taking a lot of night school, and he's almost graduated as a machinist, and he's about to get married, so he's working really hard. So with his really busy schedule, we haven't been training as much, but we're trying to make a point of seeing each other on the weekends when we can. So
Good. That's good to hear that everyone that like even though it's not a huge group, that it's still going and
yes,
proliferating, and that's what I feel is when you normally have something good is that it doesn't have to be big. It needs to just can
no,
keep going, and that's great
no,
to hear.
yeah,
Well, Vic, thank you so much for being on. I hope we get to have you on again. I hope we get to do this again at some point, sooner rather than later. And folks, thanks for listening, and don't forget to keep training.